Ms. Untel. Ms. Brunner, your story of the Care Homes Initiative is it's quite a story. Thank you for sharing that. And you suggested, just the arduousness, the difficulty of making that happen. Thank you for your commitment to do that. Let's talk for a moment, if you would, what other areas in Ohio are seeing similar. I don't expect you to know the details that you know in Cincinnati, of course, but are seeing big investors come in, and more importantly, what would help the port and other organizations like it be able to fix up more homes and keep them affordable for renters, or return them to affordable home ownership? Talk that through, if you would.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. We became aware of this issue about a year ago when there's an article in the Wall Street Journal that featured Cleveland, Ohio, and the rapid increase of ownership by these institutional investors there, and that's what made us start to study what was happening here in Cincinnati. I think Ohio in general is typical of a target area because of our home values relative to the rental market. So I don't have any specific information, but I know this is something that's happening throughout Ohio. And yes, the LLCs, when we got the names of 5 different investors that had the most significant code violations from the city of Cincinnati, and then went to figure out how many homes they owned in our county, you can't look up the entity name because it's common in real estate that LLCs are used for real estate ownership. But we did find that one particular investor had 91 LLCs just in our county. So that means there's this lack of transparency, which makes accountability harder. And that's one of the changes that we would recommend, is that there's some kind of registration process that would make it easier for the local jurisdictions to then track and hold accountable these property owners for the condition of the properties. And we also discovered that many of them are still receiving homeownership credits on their property tax bills. So that's something else that should be changed. And we certainly don't want to have less costs for them than other businesses, because what they're doing is, these are businesses, so they should pay higher taxes. And I also think that we're looking into 2 other ideas. We don't know to the extent to which opportunity zone funding has been used for the investment in these properties. We know that a very significant amount of the investment is in low census tract areas. So it would be a concern, certainly, if opportunity zone funding is used for this, which is, I think, not the intent. And I think there needs to be some analysis of REIT taxation and the implications that has for this asset class.
Thanks, Ms. Brunner. Professor Desmond, 2 questions, if you'd kind of answer them together. First, addressing what Ms. Brunner said about LLCs and tell us how it's affected your ability to track who's filing evictions around the country, because I know that's a big part of the work you're doing at the Eviction Lab. And then if you would also speak for a moment about the Eviction Crisis Act, how it helps us better understand and prevent evictions.
Thank you, Chairman Brown. The growth of LLCs in the rental housing market has expanded precipitously over the years. Studies have linked LLC ownership to property neglect. This isn't because landlords who register under LLCs own older stock. It seems to be LLCs invite moral hazard. What prevents liability also seems to prevent accountability and can invite negligent behavior. Studies have also linked LLC ownership to property disinvestment, tax abandonment, even completely walking away from properties. One of the landlords I spent time with in Milwaukee, I asked her, what happened to this house that I spent a lot of time with? And she said, I just gave it back to the city. And what she meant was she just stopped paying taxes on it, let it go into tax foreclosure. Tax foreclosure should not be part of a business strategy, but for some landlords that use LLCs, it is. It is also the case that it seems to be the case that small number of landlords do an outsized number of evicting. Now, we can't know who exactly those people are because we don't know who owns our cities. If we did, we could design policies that would target the root of the eviction crisis. The Eviction Crisis Act would do a lot to get us to a better place when it comes to stemming evictions. First, it would allow us to track eviction data, which is the only way to understand if evictions are, for example, violating the Fair Housing Act. The federal government doesn't collect eviction data. The only group that does is my group at Princeton on a national level, and I promise you I will not do this forever. The second thing the Eviction Crisis Act does is look at legal reform and inside the courts and see if we can make a more humane and rational way to adjudicate the process. And third, it looks at rental assistance, and if we could figure out a way to make small dollars go a long way. For example, in Cincinnati last year, I believe 1 in 7 evictions were for less than $500. So for some cases, the line between homelessness and staying in your home doesn't cost that much money.
Thank you. Ms. Yentl, your comments on that, what the Eviction Crisis Act would do in your view?
I would point primarily to the last piece that Matt mentioned, making emergency rental assistance a permanent program and permanently funding it at $3 billion annually. The legislation was initially introduced as bipartisan legislation in the Senate in 2019. Even before the pandemic, there was bipartisan understanding and agreement that short-term rental assistance could help some families who can otherwise make ends meet absorb an unexpected financial shock and avoid eviction and the spiraling into poverty that results. It was initially envisioned as a pilot program, and then, of course, 2020 came, the pandemic, $46 billion in emergency rental assistance. We've had our pilot program. Emergency rental assistance has been successful. $40 billion of the $46 billion has been spent or obligated. 6 million families have been helped. Over 6 million payments have been made. So now it's time to take all the lessons that we learned during the pandemic from the 500 programs that were stood up across the country and put that into authorization and funding for a permanent emergency rental assistance. And again, really pleased to see that the legislation is bipartisan and does have bipartisan support.
Thank you, Senator Toomey.